The sound of shattering glass was the first clean breath I'd taken in 24 minutes. For a split second, as the cold air rushed in and kissed the cuts on my hands, the world went silent. How does a person's face, one you've seen every day for a year, curdle from teacher to monster in the time it takes to fail a test? It began with the silence of a state exam, the kind so absolute you can hear the frantic scratching of graphite on paper and the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I was drowning in Spanish verb conjugations when the vibration started, a low buzz against my leg, a forbidden sound in this sterile room. My phone. Miss Wexler's head didn't even snap up. Her focus remained on her clipboard, a queen surveying her silent, trembling kingdom. The second buzz was more insistent. I slid the phone from my pocket, shielding it beneath the lip of the desk. The screen read, Rosewood Hospice. Ice flooded my veins. I pressed accept, the phone glued to my ear. The voice was calm, practiced, the kind of professional calm that delivers devastating news every day. Your mother is declining fast, she said, her words clinical and sharp. She has maybe 30 minutes left, if she's lucky. 30 minutes. The hospice was a 20-minute walk, 10 if I ran. My mind started calculating, shedding the useless weight of exam scores and graduation requirements. There was only one thing in the world that mattered now. I stood up, the legs of my chair screeching against the linoleum. Every head in the room lifted, startled. Every head but one. Miss Wexler. She finally looked up, her eyes devoid of any warmth. They were like polished river stones. Phones are an automatic fail during state exams, Archie, she said, her voice flat. No, please, you don't understand. It was the hospice, my mom. A flicker of something annoyance crossed her face. Your mom's been dying for months now, hasn't she? She said, the question a casual cruelty. Convenient timing for test day. Before I could react, she was at my desk. Her fingers, surprisingly strong, snatched the phone from my hand. She walked back to her desk, dropped it in the top drawer, and turned the key. The click echoed in the silent room. 28 minutes left, she said, more to the class than to me. Just let him go, please. My best friend, Isabella, shot to her feet, her voice trembling with outrage. Miss Wexler moved with an unnerving calm, planting herself in front of the classroom door like a human barricade. Anyone who helps him leave gets reported for academic dishonesty, she announced, her gaze sweeping across the room, daring anyone else to challenge her. Through the small holes in her metal desk, I could see my phone's screen lighting up with texts. I could just make out the words, please hurry, not much time left. Each flash of light was a twist of the knife in my gut. My chest began to tighten. Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life, the principal's voice cutting through the tension. Please send Archie Smith to the office for emergency family pickup. A wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. It was over. She had to let me go. But Miss Wexler walked to the wall unit, her posture rigid. She pressed the button. This is Miss Wexler, she said, her voice smooth as glass. Hospice just called back. They said they made a mistake. The student is now taking a state exam. She turned back to me, her eyes arctic cold. Don't worry, she said, her lips curling into a smirk. I'm sure she's used to you disappointing her by now. The words hit me like a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs, and something inside my chest snapped. I couldn't draw a full breath. The edges of my vision started to fizz and darken. A panic attack. 18 minutes left. Anthony, the foster kid who never spoke, stood up. His mom's the only adult who remembered my birthday, he said, his voice cracking. Her cake! It was the first birthday cake I ever had. Please just let him say goodbye. Sit down, Anthony. Her command was absolute. He crumpled back into his chair, his face a mask of defeat. Then she turned her attention back to me, a cruel, speculative smile on her lips. You know what I think? She said, walking to the thermostat by the door. I bet she's not even sick. Probably just wants attention, like you always do. Her fingers flew across the keypad. A soft beep, followed by a heavy clunk as the door locks engaged. Emergency shelter mode activated, glowed on the small screen. We were sealed in. 15 minutes left. I could still make it. My Apple Watch buzzed, a frantic, desperate vibration against my wrist. Mom's heart monitor alert, vitals dropping. The panic tightened its grip, a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I fell to my knees, gasping for air. The classroom phone on her desk began to ring. She let it go for 3 rings, then 4, before picking it up with a sigh. "Hello?" I heard the tinny voice on the other end. "Is this Archie Smith's high school? His mom is." Vexler yanked the cord from the wall, silencing the call mid-sentence. "Amazing," she said to the room. "How the hospice knows exactly when we're taking state exams." Ellie, a quiet girl who always wore long sleeves to hide the bruises, stood up shaking. "She listened to me when no one else did," she whispered. "She saved my life. She wouldn't fake it." Miss Vexler's face twisted with pure venom as she stared down at me on the floor. "Well, this is the same mother who got me written up last month," she hissed. The words meant only for me. "Consider it karma. You're welcome." And there it was, the reason. It wasn't about the rules. It was revenge. 8 minutes left. My legs gave out completely, and I was crawling, clawing my way toward the locked door. That's when Ashley Perfect, straight A Ashley, who had never even had a tardy slip, climbed onto her desk. "I have something to confess," she announced, her voice ringing with false confidence. Vexler whipped around. "Ashley, what are you doing?" "I cheated," Ashley declared. "On every test. I stole the answer keys. I hacked your computer. It's all there. Check it." For the first time, a crack appeared in Vexler's iron composure. She abandoned the door, her fortress, and rushed to her computer, fumbling with her password. Ashley's eyes locked with mine. "Window," she mouthed. "Now." The room exploded. Desks banged. Kids started shouting out their own fake confessions. A wave of beautiful, chaotic noise. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the nearest chair with shaking hands, and hurled it at the window. The world dissolved into the sound of shattering glass. 6 minutes. The world was a smear of green lawns and gray sidewalks, a violent blur painted on the back of my eyelids. My lungs were on fire, each breath a mouthful of shattered glass. The cuts on my hands throbbed in time with my hammering heart, dripping blood onto the pavement, leaving a trail I didn't have time to notice. Every step was a prayer and a curse. I wasn't just running towards my mother. I was running away from the image of a teacher's cruel smile, a locked door, and a clock on the wall that was eating my life 1 second at a time. I burst through the automatic doors of Rosewood Hospice, the sudden sterile quiet a shock after the roaring in my ears. A nurse at the front desk looked up, her mouth open to say something, but I was already past her, my eyes scanning the signs. Room 119. I skidded around the corner, my sneakers squealing on the polished floor, and threw my weight against the door. The room was still and dim, and in the center of it, in that stark white bed, my mom looked impossibly small, like a bird with broken wings. Her skin was the color of old paper, so thin it was almost translucent. The rhythmic, gentle beep of the heart monitor was the only sound. As I crashed into the room, a mess of sweat and blood and ragged breaths, her eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze, cloudy but unmistakable, found mine. I stumbled to her side, grabbing her hand. It was frail, all bone and paper skin. "Mom," I gasped, the words tearing from my throat. "I'm here. I love you so much. I'm so sorry." A spark of her old strength, the fire that had defined her, returned for one last moment. Her fingers barely squeezed my hand. Her lips parted, a dry, rustling sound. I leaned in close, my ear inches from her mouth, desperate to catch every last syllable. "I love," she whispered, the words a thread of sound in the still room. Her mouth formed the shape of the last word. "You." But no sound came out. The shape was there, a perfect, silent sculpture of her love, and then it was gone. Her chest gave a final, shallow sigh. The light in her eyes faded. Her hand, which had been holding mine with all the strength she had left, went slack. The beeping of the monitor beside her bed became a single, piercing, unbroken tone. I don't know how long I stood there, holding her hand, staring at her face, lost in the echoing silence. The next thing I knew, the door burst open again. It wasn't a nurse. It was the entire class. They had all run after me. They spilled into the room, their faces flushed, their chests heaving, and stopped dead. The scene must have been horrifying. Me, covered in blood and tears, holding my dead mother's hand, a flatlining monitor screaming into the silence. Anthony, the quiet foster kid, fell to his knees by the bed and began to sob, his whole body shaking with huge, messy tears. Isabella stood beside me, not crying, but shaking with a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate in the air around her. Even the class clown, a kid who turned everything into a joke, just stood by the door, tears streaming down his face. In their eyes, I saw my own grief and anger reflected back at me. They understood. Miss Wexler hadn't just stolen my time, she had stolen my mother's last words. A nurse came in then, moving with a practiced gentleness. She silenced the piercing alarm, checked Mom's pulse even though we all knew, and wrote something on her clipboard. "The official time," she said softly, looking at me with sad, tired eyes, "was 3:47 p.m. She then picked up a tablet from the bedside table and turned the screen toward me. "I want you to see this," she said. It was the hospice call log. A list of timestamps, each one a record of their desperate attempts to reach the school. The first call was logged at 3:17 p.m., exactly 30 minutes before Mom died, just as they had warned. The numbers burned into my brain. 3:17 p.m. That was before the intercom. Before the shelter mode. Before she'd ripped the phone cord from the wall. The grief in my chest was still there, a great, hollow ache, but something else was blooming inside it, something hard and cold and sharp. It was the chilling, absolute certainty that this wasn't just cruelty. It was calculated. Miss Wexler had known exactly how much time I had left when she turned that key and locked the door. She had held the last 30 minutes of my mother's life in her hands, and she had crushed them. The numbness that had settled over me in the quiet of my mother's room began to recede, replaced by something harder and colder. It was the ice from the hospice call, now refrozen into something sharp, rage. My phone, which Isabella had retrieved from Wexler's desk after the escape, began to buzz violently in my pocket. The school. They weren't calling to see if I was okay. They were calling about a broken window. "Don't," Isabella said, her voice low and fierce. She took the phone from my shaking hand before I could hurl it against the wall. Her thumbs moved with a furious precision, taking screenshots of everything the missed calls from the hospice that flooded in after Wexler had taken it. The texts from school officials about Officer Webb investigating the vandalism. She was no longer just my best friend. She was an archivist of injustice, collecting digital ammunition while I was still trying to remember how to breathe. Within the hour, she had created a group chat. The message was simple. Write down everything you remember, every word, every second. While it's still fresh, my phone became a river of testimony. 17 different messages, all telling the same story of a locked door, a cruel smile, and a teacher who played God with a stopwatch. Maya's was the hardest to read. She typed it out exactly as she spoke, with the stutters my mom had spent hundreds of hours helping her overcome. "She taught me every day for free," she wrote, when no one else would. The official calls began. The principal's voice was a carefully measured baritone, asking me to come in tomorrow to give a statement about the incident. The word hung in the air, a sterile, corporate insult. My mother's death, my stolen goodbyes, our terror. It was an incident, like a chemical spill in the science lab, something to be managed, documented, and filed away. As we were leaving the hospice, Ashley pulled me aside in the parking lot. her face pale and scared. "It was all a lie," she whispered, wringing her hands. "The cheating, hacking the computer. I just had to get her away from that door. Am I going to be expelled?" In the same breath, she added, "I'd do it again." I saw in her eyes the terrifying math we had all been forced to do. What is a perfect record worth when measured against a human life? That night, my dad finally got home from his business trip. He walked into the house, saw the missed calls, and simply collapsed. As we sat at the kitchen table, sifting through the digital wreckage Isabella's screenshots, the emails from the district investigator, the official notice that our Spanish exam was now compromised, his eyes landed on Wexler's parting shot. "Consider it karma." He went very still. "Your mother," he said, his voice quiet. "She reported Miss Wexler last month." He explained that Mom had seen Wexler make a special needs kid stand in the corner for an hour as punishment. She filed a formal complaint. The principal had dismissed it as a misunderstanding. The final piece clicked into place. This wasn't a teacher snapping under pressure. This was a vendetta. Wexler hadn't been punishing me for having a phone. She had been punishing my mother for daring to protect another child. My mother's compassion had signed her own death warrant. The next day after school, a woman with a press badge and intense, intelligent eyes cornered me in the parking lot. "Zelda Vasquez," she said, showing me a thick folder filled with articles she'd written. "I've been investigating teachers who abuse their power for months. This is a pattern." She didn't press. She just handed me her card and said she'd be ready to listen when I was. As she walked away, I saw Ashley coming out of the principal's office, her eyes red from crying. They were threatening to put academic dishonesty on her permanent record. It didn't matter that she was trying to help me. It didn't matter that her confession was fake. She had disrupted a state exam, and in the cold calculus of the school district, that was a greater sin than letting a woman die alone. My phone rang. It was Officer Webb, his tone suggesting I was a common criminal, asking when I'd be coming to the station to give a statement about the property damage I'd caused. Our grief was no longer a private, sorrowful thing. It was being documented, filed, and weaponized. We were building our case, one screenshot, one statement, one bitter memory at a time. The system had shown us its indifferent, mechanical face, and we were preparing for war. The investigation began not with an apology or an expression of sympathy, but with an interrogation. I sat across a polished table from a district investigator named Ivette Mendoza. She spoke in the clipped, dispassionate language of liability. While I tried to describe the sound of the lock engaging, she asked if any exam papers had been left unsecured. When I talked about my mother's final moments, she wanted to know if anyone could have taken a picture of the test questions during the chaos. I realized I wasn't a victim to her. I was a variable in a compromised dataset. In a desperate attempt to make her understand, I held out my wrist and showed her the Apple Watch data from that day. "Look," I said, my voice shaking. "You can see it. You can see her heart rate dropping, minute by minute, while I was trapped in that room." She leaned in, her face impassive. She saw the graph, the descending line that marked my mother's life ebbing away. She took a photo of the screen with her phone, her expression as neutral as if she were documenting a faulty sprinkler head. My mother's dying heartbeat was just evidence, a data point for her report. While the district worried about test scores, we fought back. Isabella, a brilliant general commanding an army of grieving teenagers, organized a silent sit-in outside Wexler's empty classroom. 40 of us sat in the hallway, holding signs that said "Humanity over test scores." We didn't shout, we didn't resist when the vice principal threatened us with suspension. We just sat, a quiet testament to a decency the school had forgotten. The system, however, had its own defenses. The principal sent a district-wide email blaming the incident on a technical error with the intercom system. A lie so blatant it was laughable. The teachers' union released a statement defending Wexler, warning against a rush to judgment and praising her for following protocol. They were closing ranks, protecting their own with a wall of procedural jargon. Then, the smoking guns arrived. First, an anonymous envelope slipped under my door containing the technical manual for the classroom thermostat. The emergency shelter mode, it turned out, couldn't be activated by accident. It required a specific 5-digit override code. It was deliberate. Then, the documents from Zelda's Freedom of Information Act request came in. The intercom logs from that day had a gap. 5 minutes, the exact 5 minutes of the principal's announcement had been wiped from the official record. We thought this was it. Irrefutable proof. But at the district hearing, our proof didn't seem to matter. We were ushered into a wood-paneled conference room where a lawyer informed us that our testimony would be limited to direct observations only. No emotional impact statements were allowed. They had found a rule to make our pain inadmissible. We watched as the principal testified that he had followed standard protocol. We listened as Mendoza presented PowerPoint slides about exam security procedures. We were not people whose lives had been shattered. We were a procedural anomaly. The verdict came a week later, not with a bang, but in a series of sterile emails and quiet phone calls. The principal received an official reprimand and was mandated to attend 40 hours of crisis management training. He kept his job, his salary, and his pension. Miss Wexler, who was on paid administrative leave the entire time I was trying to figure out how to pay for a funeral, was reassigned to an administrative role at the district office. She would get remediation training, and we all knew she'd be back in a classroom within a year or two, quietly transferred to another school where no one knew her name. Ashley, for the crime of creating a distraction to save a life, received academic probation and had to write a 10-page essay on academic integrity. I was ordered to pay $200 for the broken window or perform 20 hours of community service at the very school that had held me captive. My permanent transcript would forever carry an incomplete for the Spanish exam, a black mark that could cost me college scholarships. The final insult came 3 weeks later. The school board, in a public meeting, voted to approve a new set of safety rules inspired by the incident. They called it the Henderson Protocol, named after some superintendent who had died in the 82nd. They had debated override buttons and emergency keys, all because my mother had died, and they didn't even have the decency to put her name on it. They had not only failed to deliver justice, they had erased her from her own legacy. We buried my mom in a small chapel she'd always liked, on a day when the sky was a brilliant, unforgiving blue. We couldn't afford much, but the room was full. The entire class showed up, filling every pew and standing along the walls, their presence a silent, unified accusation. Anthony, who I'd barely heard speak more than a few words at a time, stood at the front and read a poem he'd written about birthday cakes and second chances, his voice shaking but clear. Maya sang my mom's favorite hymn, her stutter fighting her on every verse, but she never stopped, and her courage was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It wasn't a funeral for a victim. It was a testament to the life she had lived, spoken by the kids she had saved in 100 different quiet ways. Justice was a word that no longer held any meaning for me. The district had given us its verdict, a hollow resolution of procedural slaps on the wrist. They had protected their own. We were left with the wreckage. But in the weeks that followed, we began to build something of our own from the rubble. It started with a shoebox. Our whole class met in the parking lot, and one by one, they filled it with cash they had collected. Anthony had done car washes. Maya sold her Pokémon cards. They raised $800. It was enough to pay the school for the window I broke, and for paint and supplies for Miss Wexler's old classroom. The following Saturday, we went back. We didn't ask for permission. We walked into that room, the scene of our shared trauma, and we began to erase it. We painted over the sterile beige walls with a soft, calming blue. We cleaned the dust from the windows and fixed the desks that had been overturned in the chaos. No one talked much. We just worked, the silence filled with the rhythmic scrape of rollers on the wall. We weren't just painting a room. We were performing an exorcism, reclaiming the space where our innocence had been shattered. Late one night, scrolling through my phone, I found it. An old voicemail from 2 weeks before she died, one I'd never deleted. Her voice, so clear and casual, reminding me of a dentist appointment. And then, right at the end, she said it. Love you. Just like that. the way moms do when they don't know it might be the last time. I played it over and over, 100 times, letting her voice wash over me. And in the dark of my room, I finally understood. I had been haunted by that last, silent word, the unfinished sentence. But her love wasn't just in the sound. It was in the desperate squeeze of her hand. It was in the way her eyes found mine across the room. It was in 1,000 birthday cakes and after-school tutoring sessions and a lifetime of quiet gestures that screamed what her final breath could not. The words didn't need sound to be real. The next morning, we met at the school one last time. Anthony brought a small metal plaque we'd ordered online. The school wouldn't let us use Mom's name, but it didn't matter. We knew who it was for. As the sun came up, Anthony screwed it into the brick wall, right next to the new window pane. It was small, simple, and permanent. It said, "Every minute matters." The principal walked by and frowned, but he didn't say a word. What could he do? We had built a memorial he couldn't erase with a memo. I heard later that Miss Vexler's new administrative job was at a middle school just across the district, and she had to walk past that plaque every single morning. I hoped she read it. I hoped it haunted her. The scars are still there. My transcript has an incomplete that might cost me a scholarship. I see a therapist every week to talk about the panic that still sometimes claws at my chest. But we took their cold, indifferent verdict and forged our own. Justice isn't always found in a hearing room or a court of law. Sometimes, it's a quiet promise, carved in metal and screwed into a brick wall, a scar that reminds the world to be better. The system failed. That is the simple, brutal truth of it. It's a machine designed to protect itself, and when a human gear gets caught in its works, the machine will grind it to dust and keep running. It will issue reprimands, mandate training, and write new protocols named after long-dead superintendents, all to maintain the illusion of order. But what happens when justice is just another word for damage control? What do you do when the people in charge of protecting you are only interested in protecting themselves? We're taught that the world is run by rules. But that day, I learned that it's run by people. And people can choose cruelty. They can choose indifference. They can hide behind protocol and call it professionalism. The real question this story leaves me with is not about what one monstrous teacher did, but about the silence of a system that allows monsters to thrive. How many complaints were filed and dismissed before mine? How many children were sacrificed at the altar of due process? My mother's real legacy isn't the Henderson Protocol. It's in Anthony's confidence, in Maya's song, in Ashley's courage. It's in the 40 kids who sat silently in a hallway, and the group of friends who reclaimed a classroom with buckets of blue paint. They are the living, breathing answer to a broken system. They are the proof that humanity, not protocol, is what saves us in the end. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Every follow and comment is the fuel that helps me bring more powerful stories to light. And don't hesitate to share your own story in the comments below. I'm always here to listen.